Originally, Friday the 13th Part 2 was intended to be an anthology film based on the Friday the 13th superstition. However, after the popularity of the original film's surprise ending, the filmmakers opted to continue the story and mythology surrounding Camp Crystal Lake, a trend that would be repeated in many films in the franchise. And so it began with director Steve Miner's 1981 film, Friday the 13th Part 2.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham and I'm here with Chris. And today we are moving along with the Friday the 13th franchise and doing Friday the 13th Part 2. And this film I rewatched way more as a kid and a young man, way more than the original. This is one of the ones I always went back to. I don't know why. It's one of the slower films in the franchise, I guess I would say, but this to me this one had a lot more rewatchability. I didn't see these films in order until I was, I don't know, maybe 10, 12-ish area, somewhere around there. And I started watching them when I was probably 5 or 6. So I know I seen like part 7, The New Blood, and Jason Takes Manhattan, and then the final chapter. But this was one of the early ones I seen. The original was a little bit later on, but I definitely have some fond memories of this one, and I like this one. So, Chris, how do you feel about this second entry in the franchise?
Yeah, for me, since this was the first one that has Jason as the killer, like this one always was kind of for me like where it kind of really started, like the first one's kind of this sort of prologue, and this is kind of where it really gets going. I'd always seen the ones that I like outside of bits and pieces, like Jason being melted and Jason Takes Manhattan or something. I'd always seen 9 and 10, Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X. I saw those before all the rest, but then when I sort of went back after that to try to kind of get them all, or have my parents slowly collect them all for me, I did pretty much watch them in order from there. Like 1 through 8, I pretty much saw in order because I was kind of a stickler for wanting to watch them in order. But yeah, I always preferred this one to the first one just because, just the sense that it was actually Jason as the killer. Like this is kind of where it really gets going for me, and I kind of overall, even over time, aside from that, I think I just kind of generally prefer it. I think it starts to, I don't know, not that there's really like a set style or stride, but it kind of just feels like the model kind of gets laid down here, and it kind of, I don't know, it just really works. I don't know. I like it.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't necessarily say we have a stronger cast of characters, but I do prefer the final girl in this one. I, of course, Jason, like you said, is in it instead of his mother, so I prefer the antagonist or the killer in this one to the first one.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say, but I kind of maybe do like, I don't know, I do kind of like the human characters in this one a bit. I mean, we'll get into it as we get through the discussion, but like, I'm like, it might be kind of a bit more. I don't know. It's a little shorter than the first one, not by much. It's like 8 minutes shorter or something like that. But it's like, I don't know. I do always tend to remember some of the humans in this one a little bit more than the ones in the first one.
Yeah, I mean this, like you said, it's 8 minutes shorter, so it's got a little bit quicker pace. There's not the first one, as with any franchise, is kind of, it takes a lot of explaining. There's a lot of plot development and stuff like that, and this one kind of, we know the basis of it, so it gets into it a little quicker. Well, why don't I go ahead and I'll give you some background on the film, and then we will get into a trailer and a plot synopsis and get into all the good stuff after that.
Sounds good.
Friday the 13th Part 2 is a 1981 American slasher film produced and directed by Steve Miner in his directorial debut and written by Ron Kurz. It is a direct sequel to Friday the 13th from 1980 and the second installment in the franchise. Adrienne King, Betsy Palmer, and Walt Gorney reprised their respective roles from the first film as Alice Hardy, Pamela Voorhees, and Crazy Ralph. And then Amy Steele and John Fury also star in this film. Taking place 5 years after the first film, Part 2 follows a similar premise with an unknown stalker killing a group of camp counselors at a training camp near Crystal Lake. The film marks the debut of Jason Voorhees as the series' main antagonist. Originally, Friday the 13th Part 2 was intended to be an anthology film based on the Friday the 13th superstition. However, after the popularity of the original film's surprise ending, the filmmakers opted to continue the story and mythology surrounding Camp Crystal Lake, a trend that would be repeated in every film in the franchise. And like the original film, Friday the 13th Part 2 faced opposition from the Motion Picture Association of America, who noted its accumulative violence as problematic, resulting in numerous cuts being made to allow for an R rating. And this film opened theatrically in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco on May 1st, 1981, to generally negative reviews from critics, of course. Like Chris has stated, it's a horror movie, and 9 times out of 10, critics are not going to be a fan of horror movies with blood and guts and nudity.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is this whole the part 2, like the part 2, part 3, part 4 kind of naming scheme. It's kind of associated with these sort of slasher franchises that just go on and on and on and on. Like, oh, they just part 2, part 3, part 4. And it's funny that it kind of came like it was made famous kind of by these sort of schlocky horror movies. But the thing that kind of made it popular before that was when they made a sequel to The Godfather, and Francis Ford Coppola didn't want it to seem like it was like a cash grab sequel. So he thought by calling it Part 2, it legitimized it as sort of not a sequel, but more of The Godfather. Like, you have The Godfather, and this is the continuation of that story. He thought the Part 2 was sort of attaching it to the original as if it was all one thing. And then it's funny that all these horror movies kind of mimicked that, and it became and something like Part 2 became kind of synonymous with like, oh, these schlocky run of the mill cranked out really fast these sequels. So I always thought that was a funny little anecdote.
Yeah, I like that. I always liked that. You know, nowadays these horror franchises go back to just being named the same name as the original. You know, the
Yeah, that's
Halloween
how they do.
or
Yeah, that's how they do it.
Scream.
That's how they do a sequel without doing a sequel, and then outside of that, they always want to have some kind of. I don't like the numbers because I think the numbers kind of like it does feel a little tacky, but I'm all for like giving it a unique subtitle or something like that. You know, like giving it a unique name. Like, regardless of what I thought of the movies, I thought doing like Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, like I thought that was pretty inventive. You know.
Yeah, just something to add a little something to the title instead of, because like now you like for the Halloween franchise, I'm sure, you know, once we get to that, or there's the first Halloween in 78, Rob Zombie's Halloween in 2007, and then the Halloween 2018, and there's only so many times you can use the title Halloween.
There's 3 different Halloweens, and there's 2 different Halloween 2s. And so, and they're different sequels and redos of each other. And, you know, there's Halloween H2O, which is a sequel to the Halloween and Halloween 2. And then there's like, it's like, what are you talking about here? Like, it all just connect. It's like the naming scheme is a nightmare for people that don't know the franchise.
Yeah, I like in this one how after the Jason Takes Manhattan, you know, they kind of Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X. You know, it wasn't just Jason 10 or Friday the 13th Part 10. It was a little different, kind of more catchy.
Yeah, and like, you know, definitely OCD triggering because they'll call it Jason X, but it's not really chronologically the 10th entry, and also it's not like the franchise name isn't Jason, so it's like there's not a Jason 1 through 9. It's just Friday it's like that, stuff like that would drive childhood me nuts, but that's all besides the point.
That's all right. We will deal with it just because we like the films.
Yeah, I didn't know this was Steve Miner's first movie. Like, that's impressive that it's the first movie he's directed. I mean, a lot of directors get in the horror genre, and like we all know, he's directed a couple of these kind of genre movies. I just didn't know this was his debut. And I do like that. I like that it's a true sequel. I think the horror franchise thing, you hear about all these stories about Halloween was going to be an anthology, and then this was going to be an anthology, and even Stranger Things was initially going to be an anthology series. But I think once they take off, and you have these sort of locations or characters or iconography that kind of become popular for a franchise, I can understand you kind of want to latch onto that and just continue telling stories with that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when Halloween 3 came out, and Michael Myers wasn't in it, it was an uproar. So, in Halloween 4, they brought him back, and the box office numbers boomed, because in the subtitle or the subtext of the film, the heading, it was literally the return of Michael Myers. So they knew what they were doing once Halloween 3 bombed.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that drives me nuts, because then you can go story-wise from Halloween 2 to 4 almost as if Halloween 3 never happened, but the numbering doesn't allow you to do that. You can't just skip from 2 to 4. You just feel like in the name there's a missing movie there, even though that missing movie has nothing to do with the other movies. So I'm like, oh my gosh. Like I said, young me, my OCD was always triggered by this sort of thing.
He's beating himself up over something he has no control over.
I'm like, we've got to rename all these movies so that I can skip them without feeling bad.
Well, how about we go ahead and get into a trailer for the film. We'll get a plot synopsis rolling, and we'll come back with some more quick numbers, some fun facts, and get into the good stuff on Friday the 13th Part 2.
Hello?
On a June night in 1980, Friday the 13th, 12 of her friends were murdered. Why should Friday the 13th, 1981 be any different? Friday the 13th, Part 2. The body count continues. 14.
All doomed. You're all doomed.
15.
God.
16. 17. 18. 19. 20. 21. 22. 23.
Sandra? Jeff?
The day you count on for terror is not over. Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Two months after the murders at Camp Crystal Lake, sole survivor Alice Hardy is recovering from her traumatic experience. In her apartment, when Alice opens the refrigerator to get her cat some food, she finds the severed head of Pamela Voorhees and is murdered with an ice pick to her temple by an unknown intruder. 5 years later, Paul Holt opens a school for camp counselors on the shore of Crystal Lake. The camp is attended by Sandra, her boyfriend Jeff, Scott, Terry, Mark, Vicky, Ted, and Paul's assistant Ginny, as well as many other trainees. Around the campfire that night, Paul tells the counselors the legend of Jason Voorhees, a boy who drowned at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957, sending his vengeful mother on 2 killing sprees in 1958 and 1979, until she was eventually killed by Alice Hardy in self-defense. According to the legend, Jason survived and is now living in the woods near Crystal Lake, enraged at his mother's death. He will kill anyone he comes across. As Paul finishes the story, a man with a spear scares everyone, but it's revealed to be Ted wearing a mask. Paul reassures everyone that Jason is dead and that Camp Crystal Lake is now condemned and off limits. That night, Crazy Ralph wanders onto the property to warn the group, but is garroted from behind by a tree by an unseen killer. The following day, Jeff and Sandra sneak off to Camp Crystal Lake and find a dog carcass before getting caught by Deputy Winslow and returning to the camp. Later, Winslow spots a man wearing a burlap sack mask running across the road. Winslow chases him into the woods and finds a shack. The man kills Winslow with a hammer claw. Back at camp, Paul offers the others one last night on the town before the training begins. 6 stay behind, including Jeff and Sandra, who are forced to stay as punishment for sneaking off. At the bar, Ginny muses that if Jason were still alive and had witnessed his mother's death, it may have left him with no distinction between life and death or right and wrong. Paul dismisses the idea, proclaiming that Jason is nothing but an urban legend. Meanwhile, the assailant appears at the camp and kills the counselors one by one. Scott has his throat slit with a machete while caught in a rope trap, and Terry is killed off-screen upon finding Scott's dead body. Mark has a machete slammed into his face, and he falls down a flight of stairs as he dies. The killer then moves upstairs and impales Jeff and Sandra with a spear as they have sex, then stabs Vicky to death with a kitchen knife. Ted stays behind at the bar while Ginny and Paul return to find the place in disarray. In the dark, the killer ambushes Paul and continues to chase Ginny throughout the camp and into the woods, where she comes across the shack. After barricading herself inside, she finds an altar with Pamela Voorhees' severed head on it, surrounded by a pile of bodies. Realizing that Jason Voorhees is the killer, Ginny puts on Pamela's sweater and tries to psychologically convince Jason that she is his mother. The ruse briefly works until Jason sees his mother's head on the altar and awakens from the trance. Paul suddenly returns and tries to save Ginny, but Jason incapacitates him. Just as Jason's about to kill Paul with a pickaxe, Ginny picks up a machete and slams it down into Jason's shoulder, seemingly killing him. Paul and Ginny return to the cabin and hear someone outside. Thinking that Jason has followed them, they open the door only to find Terry's dog Muffin. Just as they sigh in relief, an unmasked Jason bursts through the window from behind and grabs Ginny. She then awakens to being loaded into an ambulance and calls out for Paul, who is nowhere to be seen, leaving his fate ambiguous. Back in the shack, Pamela's head remains on the altar, but Jason is nowhere to be found.
All right. How about we get into some numbers on Friday the 13th Part 2? Friday the 13th Part 2 had a budget of $1.25 million in 1981. It brought in $6,429,784 in its opening weekend, with a box office total of $21.7 million in the United States in 1981.
It's a nice little victory.
It is. I don't know. I can't do it on my phone at the moment, but I don't know if you want to adjust for inflation with these or not. That is totally up to you.
Let's see here. You keep talking and I'll get back to you.
On Rotten Tomatoes, Friday the 13th Part 2 holds an approval rating of just 32% based on 47 reviews with an average score of 4.6 out of 10. On Metacritic, it has a weighted average score of 26 out of 100 based on 8 critics indicating generally unfavorable reviews. A 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb. Here go our wonderful Google users again. 86% of Google users like this film.
There we go. There's Google coming in clutch. $21.7 million in 1981 would equal to about $77 million today. That's a nice little haul.
Yeah, so the budget, we figured on the last one, so that budget is probably a little bit closer to 5 because I believe the budget of the first one.
Yeah, the budget would end up being about 5.3 million for 2024.
Okay, yeah, so 5 million for 70 million and change.
Yeah.
There is no wonder they made a third one.
Yeah, no kidding. 5 million for 77 million. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why Paramount kept doing them. They were always kind of like quietly ashamed of these movies, and they were too profitable to give up.
Yeah, in the 80s, that all these little, the My Bloody Valentine, the Halloweens, the Friday the 13th, they were so cheap to make, but you'd make 30, 40 million because you got the couples that are going out on date nights and whatnot like that, and they're going to see a scary movie.
Well, and then they're going into the video stores and all that stuff. All that stuff is just money. When your bottom line is so small, $1.5 million, like you're just making bank on every transaction.
Yeah, I remember constantly renting the Friday the 13th and whatnot from Family Video and Hollywood Video and all that. So I was a nice little chunk of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
The kill count for this film. There's a total of 9 deaths, which average out to a kill every 9.6 minutes, which is just slower than the original, which had a total of 10 deaths, averaging out to 1 kill every 9.5 minutes. So these are neck and neck in that category.
So it seems to average about 9 to 10 minutes so far as the average for the franchise. You go about 9 to 10 minutes, and you got to get another kill in.
Yep, and I'm cool with that. This film, like you said, is about 8 minutes shorter, and it has 1 less death. So we're pretty much right there, right in the money.
Yeah, I mean, you had the prologue in the first one where it was kind of a 2-for-1, and then you have Jeff and Sandra in this one that are kind of a 2-for-1. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
And then my last number for you is Jason's screen time, which he is on screen for 6 minutes and 23 seconds, or about 7% of the film. So he's not on camera very much in here in his film technical debut.
Yeah, but I mean, again, kind of a different ball game. You kind of expect the killer to be hidden. As long as you're seeing the kills and getting the goods, it's kind of, no one's like, oh my gosh, we didn't see Jason enough. It's kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never complain about like we said it in the Godzilla franchise, like too much Godzilla, or same with this. Like if we get 10, 15 minutes of Jason or something like that, I'm not going to complain. But if it's directed right and, he's hidden in the shadows with like the lighting and stuff where we just see enough of him, I'm 100% okay with that too.
Yeah, and plus these are real short movies, and they got other things going on. Like you're seeing the violence and the kills, you're seeing the pretty girls, you got other things going on to kind of, keep the interest levels high while Jason's not necessarily on screen. So
Absolutely. I'll go into some fun facts for you. I don't have too many for this film. I picked out a couple. The initial idea for a sequel involved the Friday the 13th title being used for a series of films released once a year that would not have direct continuity with one another, but be a separate scary movie in their own right, which, we mentioned that earlier with the so-called anthology series that this was going to be.
Yeah, and that might have been a better idea to kind of like future-proof the franchise, because then you could just keep doing a Friday the 13th about anything. But, I mean, think about the iconic franchise we would no longer have if they'd just done that,
Yeah, I know they did end up doing like a weird like anthology like TV series show for this.
Yeah, which I've never watched a single episode of, but
I have not either.
Yeah.
The use of the sack hood in this film was similar to the 1976 film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And I have not seen the original for that, but I have seen the remake, and the remake is a pretty decent movie on its own.
I've never seen either, but I'm sure that I think it was the original's like poster art or box art that I had seen many times, and every time I would see it, there's one that has like that hooded figure on it, and I would be like, man, I'm wondering, as a kid and growing up, you're like, was that inspired by Jason in this movie, or was Jason in this movie sort of taken from that, but the similarity always struck me.
Yeah, I know the remake is pretty brutal. So I mean, if you got time one day, and I would highly recommend it as just like a quick little like 90-minute
Nice.
watch for you or anyone out there.
Cool.
A total of 48 seconds had to be cut from the film in order to avoid an X rating, and some of that had to be. Well, I will mention that actually a little later. Sorry, that's in one of my fun facts down below.
All right, sounds good.
This was the 35th highest grossing film of 1981, facing strong competition from high profile horror releases such as The Omen 3, The Final Conflict, The Evil Dead, The Howling, My Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me, Graduation Day, Halloween 2, and The Burning. So, I mean, 81 was a huge year for horror.
Yeah, Omen 3, Evil Dead, and Halloween 2. That's pretty big. Like Evil Dead and Halloween 2 are the ones that stick out for me personally, but that's not a bad lineup for horror movies along with Friday the 13th Part 2.
No, and then I also like I haven't seen Happy Birthday to Me, but My Bloody Valentine.
Oh yeah, My Bloody Valentine. Yeah, that's a big one.
And then the Burning. I'm not as big a fan of that, but I have watched it a couple times, and it's not a bad little horror film. Got some good special effects and whatnot.
Okay, all right, nice.
My last fun fact for you is part of the reason this originally got an X rating, and it was Paramount discovered actress Marta Kober, who plays Sandra in the film, was only 16, and a scene showing her with full frontal nudity had to be completely deleted after they found out.
Yeah, I also heard that, and that's kind of crazy that stuff like that kind of flew by the radar in movies like this back then. And it's kind of still surprising that as much of their scenes are still left in the movie as is, considering that fact.
Yeah, and I mean, the scene with them getting impaled. I'm blanking on what film that actual scene was taking from the double impalement.
Oh yeah, oh gosh, what's the? Hold on, it.
Like Mario Bava's or what? Oh, I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but
yeah, it's hold on now. You're upright. I've got to take it. I've got to find it. Let's see here. It's got to be. Oh my goodness! Hold on. Twitch of the Death Nerve. That's it. 1971. Twitch of the Death Nerve.
Yes,
and,
that is what.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, I haven't actually seen the whole film, but the scene in that one is much more graphic than what Friday the 13th did.
Yeah, and the deleted violent material from this movie, it's been found just in lower generation quality. Like they haven't found like perfect sort of film masters. It's sort of a lot of it is sort of like a videotape kind of quality, lower grade quality, and it's a shame. So it would be very difficult to kind of properly cut it back into the movie to make an uncut version. I'm sure nowadays with like digital upscaling and AI cleanup and AI upscaling, you probably could use the rest of the film as reference and then use some kind of program or algorithm to make that low grade footage almost seamlessly on the tier of quality of the rest of the footage, and you probably could create an uncut version of these movies, but it's just a matter of them taking the kind of the time and effort to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the films are like that. The only one that really isn't in this that was absolutely butchered was Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, and that a lot of that footage was lost for good or is just
well, yeah, the videotape footage of that again is there, but it is like it's kind of a garbage tier level. Like you'd have to really break out some very special techniques just to kind of get it to a kind of workable. It could be done. Like it could be done. It wouldn't be like if they can take old Betamax videotapes and upscale them to 4K. And yeah, it looks a little weird, but it's like you would think that with the footage they have of the film proper and the videotape footage and some of this cleanup work, some of this upscaling work, some of this matching work, you think that now or within a few years from now that maybe there's a solution there that could be mostly satisfying, you know.
Yeah, that'd be nice to see, these films in their fully restored glory. But
Yeah,
I like them just how they are. But,
it still works, and some of
48
them
seconds.
like the editing and the quick cutting sort of, like, I've seen the extended version of Alice's death with the pickaxe through her temple, where she sort of is turned, like, all of this stuff is on YouTube. She's turned towards the camera, and like, it's just not a good moment. Like, she turns towards the camera to show that the pickaxe, the ice pick is going like through her face, but it's a weird kind of a goofy moment because of the expression she makes. So it's like, it's probably better that that one was cut out, you know. So it's not, more is not always better, but sometimes it is.
Well, yeah, and speaking of that scene, another thing is she was actually a little bit injured during a shooting of that scene, because they instead of using an actual prop ice pick, they actually used a real one, and clearly she didn't get. Yeah, she didn't clearly get too hurt or seriously injured, but it was just enough to where she felt it. But that was another one of the fun facts that I had seen.
Yeah, that's pretty rough, you know, prop weapons versus not prop weapons. But, you know, moving along. They can keep the footage of the underage actress. No one needs to see that. Yeah, my goodness.
And yeah, 48 seconds of this film, clearly we're not missing too much. Probably just a little bit more blood, a little more
exactly.
gore.
It's not dramatic. And another one, like the double impalement with the extra footage, like it's not a very hyper convincing effect. Like, yeah, all of these effects have aged kind of rough. They're old movies, but so it's like some of the stuff, maybe sometimes it is a little bit best left to the imagination.
Absolutely. All right, Chris. Here, why don't you go ahead and give me your favorite character for Friday the 13th Part 2?
Yeah, so I've got a favorite, but I've got kind of some standouts here. But Ted is definitely probably my favorite because he's a comic relief character, and it was the longest time before I realized that he's one of those comic relief characters who manages to snake his way through this movie and not get killed. And I always thought that was so, like, it's so fitting for his goofy character that it's like he's left at the bar in the final act of the movie. He never goes back to camp and he never gets killed. So he gets to be this like goofball side character who's in this movie, but then he doesn't have to be a victim in the movie. So I feel like that only made me like the Ted character even more over time.
Yeah, in these films, they always say, don't drink, don't do drugs, don't have sex. And this guy, you can see he has to be loaded from all the beers that are on the counter. And he stays behind and lives.
I don't know how much, sex he's having, but he's definitely the goofball and he's definitely drinking and he manages to get away with it. As far as a favorite victim, I always liked the Vicky character she has the crush on the guy in the wheelchair, and something about her character, like you could see, like she's got a wholesome kind of vibe to her a little bit, even though she's not really like, she's not a do-gooder character, but like you could see her being like this film playing out in a way where she was maybe more of the final girl in this movie. I don't know. I always liked her character. She always seemed very sweet. No. Clearly not superficial as she's crushing on the guy in the wheelchair. And then I like Jenny. Jenny's a good final girl,
That is who I chose for my favorite character, was Jenny. And
she's one of the best final girls, I think.
Oh yeah, hands down. Not I don't think not in just this franchise, but other franchises as well. If you put, final girls head to head, she might be one of the top 5 that comes out. I find her to be like she's a very plain girl in looks wise, but she's very pretty to me, and I don't know. She's just a very plain, like down to earth, pretty girl.
It's sort of that 80s slasher movie thing where it's like the quote unquote stereotypically hot girls have to be the victims, and the final girl has to be not someone who's ugly or unattractive, but sort of downplayed a little bit. Like they're not by any means unattractive girls or anything like that, but they sort of have to come across as a little bit more standard. And so then the hot ones always get eviscerated, and then the kind of more normal one has to be the survivor. That's just kind of seems like what the rules are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. She's like your standard horror movie girl, you know, and but she's very smart. She outsmarts Jason. She's constantly fighting him, you know. She smashes a chair over him. She tries to outsmart him with like pretending to be his mom and whatnot.
Yeah,
And
resourceful.
she's very like again down to earth. Like while they're in the bar, she's like, you don't know what if there really is a Jason and all this stuff. And Paul's like, oh
Yeah.
bullshit, Jenny, it's just a legend. And
Yeah,
they go to get another drink, and she's like, nope, none for me. Like,
yeah, by this point, the sort of final girl trope, you've had Halloween and the first Friday the 13th. So the sort of hallmarks of what made a survivor girl in one of these movies was this is still the early days, so it's kind of still being forged. They got to be a little smarter, they got to be a little wise to the situation. They got to not be the kind of bimbo character who's distracted by superficial things, and so she kind of fits a lot of that mold.
yeah, and I just think she's a badass character in this. You know, she's definitely the main focus for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I did pick a score. I don't know if you. I know we said we weren't sure if we wanted to still do scores in.
Oh, hey, you can by all means mention your favorite score. I don't know by name, but I've got a track that I dig, so you can you
Okay,
can yeah,
awesome.
you can go forward and then.
All right, I'll give you my favorite score or soundtracks for the film, and it was "Keep a Cool Head," or also called the main title, and that one sounds like this.
Oh, before you play it,
Go ahead.
is that the same track that plays over the whole recap of the first movie, or is that just the main title, like over the opening credits?
That's that's just the main title. The one that's plays over the recap is actually called Flashback.
Okay, cool. So well, then I know the name of my favorite track. Then all right, we'll proceed.
I got you. All right, here we go. I'll play it right now. That one just stood out to me. I like the fast pace. I like I really like string instruments and stuff like that. So that I always look for something in these films that's like fast paced. It sets the tone and gets the film going. So that this main title track called "Keep a Cool Head" did that for me.
Hmm. I actually, yeah, and I like the track that you informed me called Flashback, that is playing through the whole coverage of the first movie, because back in this era there was like home video and some things like that, but there was always a big kind of infinite emphasis. You see it in Psycho 2 as well, where when they would make the sequel, they would kind of incorporate some kind of recap or flashback sequence of the first movie to kind of, that way if any audiences were coming in that didn't see the first one, they would just be kind of quickly and easily caught up to speed. So you see a lot of that in these horror slasher sequels, a lot of recapping the last movie or the end of the last movie. And I liked the way that it was an original piece of music that kind of emulated all of the bits and pieces from the first movie musically as it moved through the different scenes. Like when she's going to cut off Mrs. Voorhees' head, it's not the same music that played when that happened in the first movie, but it's this new track kind of emulating that same kind of sound. And I always just thought that was really cool. I really liked it. Like it really kind of refreshes that movie in your mind when you watch this one.
Yeah, I do like that. It goes along with the scene very well, you know. And I said something in the first episode we did on the original Friday the 13th that a lot of these soundtracks are recycled through probably roughly about the first 8 films or so in this franchise. So picking one for each film is going to be a little more difficult than what we did for the Godzilla franchise, but very doable. I mean, there's a couple tracks.
And when it's the same composer for, I think all 10 of the Jason movies all have the same composer. So it's when that, it's like he evolves his own style and stuff. But like when he was churning these out one year after another, it's like, of course it's the same composer doing music for the same franchise. So of course it's all going to sound quite similar,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have a problem with these soundtracks at all. I like them, and like, before we do these episodes, I'll listen to the soundtrack once or twice, and I'll pick out the favorite one that I like that stands out the most, and that's the one I'll go with. And I'll compare it to when I'm watching the film. Like, I'll be like, "Ooh, this is the soundtrack I chose, and how does it flow with the scene that it's encompassing and whatnot." So I kind of nerd out when I choose my favorite soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't did you have a favorite quote or most memorable line for this film?
Yeah, so I almost always, there's kind of two that I have, so maybe I'm cheating. There's a funny one, and then there's a sort of like the horror one. So the funny one is when Paul comes back to the camp, and he's like, he finds the joy, and he's like, these kids smoke better dope than I do, like that always, like even on this rewatch, that line caught me off guard, and I just like laughed a lot at that line, and then the bit when Jenny and Paul are in the room and she starts to see someone and she goes, Paul, there's someone in this room. And then she really clearly sees it. And then she goes, Paul, there's someone in this effing room. Like the panic of that, like always really, really got me. It's like, cause you can imagine being sort of two people alone in like a dark room and like, you think you see something. So you're like, kind of like calmly being like, hey, I think there's something over there. And then you realize you're like, oh my God, there's something over there. Like, I don't know. It's such a genuine moment of terror for me. So I really like that line.
Yeah, that one, you're kind of like, you're relaxed at first, but then it sets the panic and the horror in like right now, as soon as you see Jason kind of slowly rise up.
Yeah, like the adrenaline hasn't spiked just yet.
Yeah, and the Paul one, that every time I watch this, I'm with you. It gives me a chuckle when he says that, these kids smoke better dope than I do. And then it goes immediately from that to them going upstairs to see the blood-soaked bed sheets and stuff like that. So it gives you a nice little chuckle, and then we're straight back to the horror movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I chose a quote from Crazy Ralph, and I liked him in the first film a lot, and I liked him in this second film as well. And I kind of thought when I was younger that he not so much was going to be like our Dr. Loomis character, like always around the camp trying to warn kids and tell them. And to see him kind of meet his demise early on in this film, it was just like, oh, that kind of sucks. I was hoping he would stick around. I like that character. But I chose his quote that said, I told the others, they didn't believe me. You're doomed. You're all doomed. And I don't know why I like that quote. It just kind of, the way Jeff and Sandra are looking at him like, what the hell is this guy's problem?
I like it. In the first one, he's kind of like, because the first one's kind of a genuine mystery in that they're trying to set you up with Mr. X of who the killer is, and Crazy Ralph is one of the red herrings. And then like in this one, clearly it seems like they kind of play the game of like, are we going to set up Crazy Ralph as the killer? Are we going to maybe do a thing where Crazy Ralph is the killer, like he's Crazy Ralph for a reason, and then having him be an early victim is like, oh, well then who the heck is the killer, like, so it's a fun little, like, they play with like, are they going to double dip on the red herring, or is he going to actually be crazy? And then they kill him off. So it's like this like triple subversion almost.
Yeah, and I would have loved to get more of Crazy Ralph, and even a little cameo in another sequel or two. But he bit the bullet early in this one, and I kind of say I was that was one death in this one when I was younger, that probably the only death that I was upset about.
Yeah, because I mean, like he's everyone that returns from the him and Alice kind of are technically surviving characters from the first movie, and they both return in this one and get killed off.
Yeah, and you a lot of times you don't see returning characters. I mean, he didn't have a big part in the first film, but he just here warning people like, hey, don't go to this place.
Yeah, it's a nice tether. It's a nice tether.
Yep, it sure is. All right. Did you have a favorite scene if it wasn't your favorite kill scene? Did you have a different favorite scene than that?
It's gotta be the I always, when Jenny hides in her car and Jason is like stabbing the pitchfork through the roof and all that stuff, like it just that kind of the sort of the small space and the nowhere to go element of it always triggered anxiety in me as a kid, so I always liked that one as far as just like a scene of just like horror and suspense.
Okay, I like that one as well. That is a good scene. I ended up choosing the shack battle, where she tries to outsmart him.
Okay.
With, she puts on his mom's sweater and tries to play the game. And
so you're not going with the skinny dipping scene? That's what I thought.
No. No.
I'm joking.
Come on, we got to be family friendly on here.
Yeah,
Jeez,
yeah, family friendly with this R-rated movie with violence and nudity. Yes.
Hey, I mean, if we were watching it at 5, 6 years old, why can't kids nowadays?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Oh, their video games nowadays are worse than this.
Yeah, true.
But I like the shack battle. Paul shows up, and I see myself in him trying to like save your girlfriend or the girl you want, and he just totally gets overpowered. And if it wasn't for Jenny, he'd be a goner too.
Yeah, he's kind of like there's kind of another kind of like a bit of the trope of the sort of because the killers in these movies are often men. The survivors are often these final girls, these loner final girls, and sometimes they have like a boyfriend character who makes it with them. But like that boyfriend character is always kind of like inept or like a little weakling, kind of beta. Like he's not able to really stop and save her from the killer or whatever. And so Paul's not that, but he's kind of the precursor of that kind of side character. That kind of the shrimpy boyfriend who like the final girl likes because he's like sensitive and nice, but like he's not really very useful or successful in terms of helping the outcome. So Paul's kind of that character.
Yeah, he's 0-2 in his bouts with Jason.
Yeah, and here, let me ask your honest opinion, because so do you think the end is an implication that he was killed, or is he just not around at that moment when Jenny wakes up?
I honestly am not sure on this. I think that maybe I think that he was possibly killed in the shack, and as like Jenny was like maybe swinging the machete down into Jason's shoulder and collarbone, like maybe Jason like took his axe and like got Paul with it or something, and
yeah, because
the last little part was a dream, like Muffin coming back and whatnot.
Yeah, because some people kind of imply that like that was a dream, but it's like, at what point do we switch over? It's like, did she take Jason out? Because I mean, she definitely stabbed Jason in the shoulder with the machete, but it's like, and then so then her and Paul leave, and I always kind of thought it was implied that like she's passed out after that moment, but it's like, was like, did Paul like leave her somewhere and then Jason got him and then the ambulance gets her the next morning or something? Or is it just kind of one of those things where it's like, well, he's been taken away or he's off the side, maybe even for questioning, considering this was all his whole ordeal and now everyone's dead, and she's calling for him. I'm like, so it's like, it's hard to feed it through logically. I kind of like to think, just especially a little bit with the way the third movie goes, like it doesn't seem like there's a window there where Paul got killed necessarily. And maybe that's just me wanting there to be another survivor. But I always kind of like to think that like, no, he's almost just as likely to be on the hook for all these deaths as he is killed,
Yeah, like you said, maybe maybe he was handcuffed in a police car on the side or something. Who knows?
I mean, if you go to set up a camp with like a dozen kids, and then like almost all of them are murdered, the other ones are drunk in town, and like the one girl's like out of her mind, and you seem more or less fine, they're gonna be like, dude, what the hell did you do? You know, like like so I that's kind of what I tend to think happened. He's arrested and apprehended.
Yeah, it's always fun to theorize because this is one of those endings that get fans in the horror community talking.
Yeah, he's got to have Ted trying to vouch for him.
All right. What I'll give you my favorite kill. I'll go ahead first on this one.
Okay.
And I chose Mark for a couple reasons.
That's what I was gonna go with too.
Hey, we can shine together on this one. And it's just
sure.
He's not a sad character, but again, he's a down to earth character. He knows like he had a motorcycle accident, he's injured, the doctors tell him he's never gonna walk again, but he's like, it's ironic. He says, I don't intend to spend the rest of my life in this chair. And then, probably less than a couple hours later, he sure gets it and bites the dust sitting in his chair. He just gets a machete to the face and rolls backwards downstairs.
Yeah, and the rocketing backwards down the stairs is like, for me, like it's one of the iconic moments of the franchise. It's just like one of those like, it's just a visual you don't forget. He gets the machete to the face and then rolling down the stairs. Like it's just like that's one of the best ones just in terms of like visuals,
Yeah, that's definitely, and it comes out of nowhere and you can sense the music and stuff like that turning.
Yeah, the camera angles and stuff make you kind of think that it's going to come from a different direction, and then it's just like slammed into his head and it's like, oh my goodness,
Yeah, that was an intense death. That might have been like almost like a jump scare back in the day. Yeah, but nowadays you're so used to jump scares and stuff.
None of these movies make anybody jump anymore. I don't think modern teens would be caught off guard by most of this, but it's a great one.
Yeah, it's probably the most brutal kill in the film for sure.
Yeah, I like the to give an honorable mention just to give us a different look. I do like the hanging upside down throat slit, just because you see a lot of throat slits in horror movies, and it's always when they're standing upright and the blood goes down the neck in sort of the typical way. So this one being upside down was just kind of a nice inversion on it, that's like the blood running down over the face as they're upside down, like. And I don't know, it's just an interesting visual, and that actor always kind of like that actor and character always kind of made me get like made me think of like Stifler from the American Pie movies, like John William Scott, like just the way he kind of like talks or makes like sarcastic remarks and whatever, like, and he's kind of a pervert, like he kind of just feels like that's the character that Stifler's kind of like part of the DNA of, and so it's like it's fun to see this like the early pervert character who gets killed off, kind of a trope, like that's always fun.
Yeah, if I had to choose one, since we both chose Mark, if I had to go with a different one, I probably would have chose the sheriff or the police officer. The way he kind of takes the back of that hammer, the claw of the hammer in the back of the head, and you just see him look up and like scream in agony, and then the screen cuts. That would be a terrible way to go.
It's one of those nightmare things because like everyone's swung a hammer and interacted with the hammer. Like maybe not everyone's been up close with a machete or something, but like everyone kind of knows like the sort of dimensions and dynamics of a hammer and the hammer claw. So you can just imagine catching that to the back of the head. Like, oh.
You're gonna be alive for a little bit, so you're gonna be able to fully experience that, and that's what makes me think about that one and think, yeah, that's terrible. That would be an awfully terrible way to die.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I got for you for that. What did you think of Jason's design in this? The outfit of him in this first film that he is the main antagonist in.
It's a nice sort of progression. The burlap sack with the one eye is definitely kind of like creepy. You get a sense of like performance from that one eye. Don't necessarily like love the overalls. Like that is what that is. Like, and the sort of like the plaid kind of checkered outfit. Like it's kind of odd. Like I kind of get that they're going for this kind of like this is like weird and unsettling, but like it's not terribly sort of like iconic or simple in that way. And he's not really. I feel like the pickaxe is more of his thing in this movie. Like he doesn't really like in the way that Freddy has the glove. I don't think the machete has become like the standard in this movie. In a lot of these early movies, Jason doesn't really have a set standard, you know. But I dig the design. His face unmasked kind of has that kind of like deformed hillbilly look to it. That's like pretty unsettling and unnerving. You know, I dig it.
Yeah, he's definitely not the cutest kid or cutest character in this film.
He's very Wrong Turn, Jason, in this movie. If you've ever seen Wrong Turn, he feels like he's cut from that cloth.
Yes, absolutely. I like his design in this. The one thing that sticks out, like you said, is the one hole instead of two. It kind of makes it just more creepy. And I mean, it's like, why not cut that other hole? Like what? Mm-hmm. That has to be a pain in the ass for him to try to chase somebody with one hole in a sack instead of two. Like, but like you said, the weapons in this, I like how he doesn't really have a main weapon to go to. You said he's got the pickaxe, he's got the machete, he's got the hammer, he's got the pitchfork. And like there's just he uses whatever he can get his hands on in these early films and quite a bit later on as well. But most people, when they think of Jason, they think machete.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. How about we go ahead and roll into some final thoughts, and we'll get into our tier ranking for the two films we have, and then we'll get on to what our next episode will be on the franchise.
Yeah, sure. So final thoughts is sort of, you know, when George, you know, not to go all roundabout to make my point here, but when George Lucas was getting ready to make The Empire Strikes Back, he told the director of that movie, he goes, you know, this one gets to determine if Star Wars ends and stops with two movies or if it becomes a franchise that continues forever. And so that was the pressure that was put on the director of The Empire Strikes Back. And that's very much kind of like what this is. Like if this had been some horrible failure misfire, then the Friday the 13th movie is just one movie with like a horrible sequel, you know, like King Kong and Son of Kong or something like that. But because it kind of took off and really landed and worked, well, now it's a franchise that then spawns into, you know, all of these other Jason movies, you know. So it just kind of set it and established it as a series and not just one movie that worked.
Yeah, I'll even do you one better for a good original and a terrible sequel. The 76 King Kong and then King Kong Lives.
yeah. There you go. Much better example.
But yeah, I like this film. My final thoughts on this are, you know, there's so many people have seen this, and if you haven't, it's another 90-minute watch, you know, 80, I think without the credits and stuff, I believe it's like 85, 86 minutes, somewhere around there.
Yeah, super short, awesome movie. I love short movies.
Yeah, you know, take the time, sit down, grab some popcorn or your favorite snack, watch it. And, you know, you can binge watch these films and have some fun with them. But I think, in my personal opinion, I think this is a much superior film to the first one. And I'll go right into my tier ranking with it, you know. For these two that we have, clearly the original Friday the 13th is in the 2 spot, and Friday the 13th Part 2 is in my number 1 spot for the films we have so far.
Yeah, I'll ditto that. I consider it's because, you know, the first Friday the 13th is not on the same level as like the original Halloween. It's much more of like, oh, it's one of the Halloween imitators that worked. So there was room for improvement, and I generally tend to like most aspects of this one a little bit better than the first one.
Yeah, I like you know, I like the characters more. I like Jason as the killer more than his mother. You know, I kind of like the setting more as well. It's still a cabin, you know, it's not much different, but I mean, I like Paul better as a character. I like Ted better, Ginny better. So, I mean, all in all, I just think this is a step up.
And it always felt to me like Jeff and Sandra, specifically Jeff, like it always felt to me like he was meant to be the kind of like imitation Kevin Bacon of this movie, you know, like with the hair and just kind of like the vibe of the character, and like they both die in bed and stuff like that. Like I always felt like whenever I see part 2, I'm like, this is their knockoff Kevin Bacon, you know, like that's always the vibe I got.
100% agree with you, and I'm sure 99% of Friday the 13th fans out there also will agree with you on that.
Yeah.
All right. I think this week that is all we have for Friday the 13th Part 2. Next week, we will be looking at Friday the 13th Part 3, which was released August 13th, 1982. So, Chris, I'll say thanks for joining me again on this one. You know, after doing the Godzillas and doing a couple of these, you know, I continue to have fun. I love talking about films with you. It's a blast.
It's always a good time. Always a good time.
Absolutely. So again, I will say thank you. I'll appreciate and thank everyone out there who's listening and takes the time to listen to us ramble. Friday the 13th Part 3 is next week, but until next time.
I told the others. They didn't believe me. You're all doomed. You're all doomed.